Hi, good morning, and welcome to Kunsampayo Choling. We're really happy to have you with us this morning for a teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. This teaching was originally taught in 1991, and the title is Relative and Extraordinary View. And so we will begin.
I would like to talk a little bit today about relative and extraordinary or supreme view, generally speaking. And in order to begin with that, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the misfortune that practitioners fall into. Generally, when we enter onto the spiritual path, we do so with taking with us a lot of baggage. We don't enter onto the spiritual path in a new and pure and virginal state. It seems as though we bring with us, of course, our old habitual tendencies. It may feel as though entering onto the spiritual path we have somehow been reborn, that somehow things have changed for us. Often practitioners will come to me and they'll say, gee, I've come to the temple and now I'm beginning to practice Ngundro, I'm beginning to practice Dharma, and I feel like I'm reborn, I feel like a new person, everything is really changed for me. And at that point I generally kind of do the oh God's 360, which is, rolling the eyes, because I know that it's still coming down the pike, that they are going to be brought up short, and eventually they'll have to come face to face with their old habitual tendencies. Upon entering the spiritual path, one is not changed radically. That's a joke. That's something that we made up in our minds, and we take as our proof of that the fact that we're having some kind of internal, perhaps emotional experience. Well, internal experiences, emotional experiences are not to be dismissed, especially if they provide a hook that brings us, a hook that really hooks us and brings us onto the path. Therefore, they are important. But they must be understood as phenomena, the same as any other phenomena. They are simply an event that occurs, and any event that occurs arises from the thought of self-nature as being inherently real. It is simply part of phenomenal or samsaric existence. Therefore, it is not the ultimate experience. It is not the ultimate cure. Lord Buddha teaches us that the ultimate cure to suffering is the cessation of desire, or enlightenment. The experiences that we first have when we enter onto the path may be misleading at first, and they may actually cause some suffering later on. In that when we first enter onto the path, we may think that all of our problems have magically dissipated. Or we may think that we have heard enough Dharma to have a fantastic understanding of some kind. For instance, we may hear the Buddha's teaching, and in hearing the Buddha's teaching, we may hear that the Buddha says that the contrivance of the egocentric posture that we have, or the assuming of the solidity of and reality of self-nature as being inherently real, is actually a delusion, that it is a falsehood. We may hear from the Buddha that Our true nature is the uncontrived, luminous, spacious, primordial wisdom state, which is a conditionless state, free of any limitation or contrivance. And hearing that, we may think, well, that's it then, that's the truth. Of course, nothing I see is very real, and all of this is just to be abandoned and put down, and therefore immediately I will become aware of the conditionless state. And so in doing that, we may even sit down and contrive or author. We may compose an experience in our meditation that makes us think that we have got it, that we have had a feeling of bliss, we have had a true cognition of emptiness, we have had a taste of the conditionless state. Well, upon hearing one teaching, or even some teaching, one cannot sit down and compose an experience of enlightenment. The experience of enlightenment cannot be composed. Because it is a conditionless state, it cannot be comprised of conditions, and that would be the only way to compose something. The state of enlightenment results when all of our root poisons are pacified, when there is a complete and unqualified cessation of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, of all belief that results in condition and in cause and effect relationship. It is not possible, therefore, to have such an experience immediately. There are stories in the time of Buddha where, upon hearing the teaching, someone would immediately burst into realization of some kind and become an arhat. That was a different time. That was a time of great expansion. That was the time when the Buddha actually appeared on the earth. The karmic material that composed that time was very different than the material of today. Today is Kali Yuga. Today is a very difficult time of hard contraction. All of our karma is extremely compressed. That, on the other hand, was a time of great expansion. In that day, the Buddha appeared in physical form, supremely realized. And due to the difference in karma, there was no problem with faith and devotion. One could see the Buddha. One could have faith. Unfortunately, that seems not to be the case today. This is the time where we understand that the Buddha does appear through his miraculous works. We understand that the Buddha actually does appear in the guise of our own root teachers, because the root teachers are the extension of the Buddha's activity. Yet the Buddha himself does not appear in the physical. This is not the time of the Buddha. So in this day it is very difficult to come into realization. Yet on the Vajrayana path it is possible. It is possible because the Vajrayana path is actually geared toward being most productive in a time when karma is extremely contracted and compacted. The method that is implemented in Vajrayana is extremely useful, but one must use the method. One cannot hear the teachings of the Buddha and then sit down and think one has had an experience. But that is something that happens to students. They become deluded and they make mistakes. Generally speaking, we must, as we become practitioners, in order to avoid such pitfalls, understand that there are two views that must be respected. There is the relative view that must be respected, and there is the extraordinary or ultimate view that must be respected. And it is both of these views that we must come to understand, and we must accomplish them. The relative view cannot be denied. You cannot think that you cannot think that you will reach enlightenment through some kind of denial trip. That will never happen. You cannot say, okay, I've learned that self-nature does not exist, therefore nothing I do is of any importance. Therefore, nothing that I see has any meaning. Therefore, there is no reason to be in the world, and if I am in the world, there is no condition that has any true depth or import. If you think like that, actually you are on a dangerous path. You're on a path that is closer to nihilism. But actually, you are on a path to supreme ignorance. In that, in order to attain any wisdom at all, one must understand the relative view. In that, one must understand how condition arises. Because if one does not understand how condition arises, one cannot solve the problem of conditioned experience. One must understand cause and effect relationships. It was said that the Buddha himself had attained the complete omniscience and understanding of relative view. That is, that the Buddha could see a student, a disciple might come to the Buddha, and the Buddha could understand every single cause and effect relationship that arose to bring the student to this point. And the Buddha could also see every single cause and effect relationship that would be part of the experience of that student, or would be the experience of that student as the student continued. The Buddha was capable of that kind of omniscience, and that was part of the two accumulations that the Buddha attained, that we call enlightenment. That is the accumulation of the wisdom of the knowledge of cause and effect relationships, and the accumulation of the wisdom of emptiness, which is the ultimate view. But the understanding of cause and effect relationships, the supreme awareness of the mechanics and faults of relative view, cannot be bypassed. We have to understand that. We, first of all, have to accept our condition. It has become common and fashionable in spiritual methods of this day and age to develop some kind of paper dragon confidence in oneself that is completely inappropriate on this path. That is to say that we're supposed to develop a kind of feel-good attitude. We're supposed to look at each other and say, "You're beautiful. You're perfect, just the way you are." That's kind of a new age fashionable thing, and it's kind of cute if you think about it. But it doesn't work, you see, because in thinking like that, you have nothing to hold. You have no way to understand how to actually exit your particular condition. Many people who are involved in spirituality nowadays believe that it is somehow a potent, ennobling, and empowering experience to look at each other and say, glossing over the obvious, "I see the divine in you. I see perfection in you. I see nothing but perfection. I don't see any hatred, greed, and ignorance. I see no problems." And to look meaningfully in one another's eyes, to think of themselves in that regard, is considered to be an empowering experience of some kind. Well, according to the Buddha's teaching, that's a farce. That's ridiculous. That would be equal to turning off the lights, pulling down the shades, and putting on blinders and trying to get across a room with many obstacles in it. You are very likely to stumble and fall. In fact, I can guarantee it. Because you have no way to see what it is that you're supposed to walk around, jump over, duck under, avoid completely. How can you see? How can you know what you're made of? How can you understand the condition of your mind? How can you be competent using that method? We must attain the wisdom of relative view. You cannot deny relative view. If you feel inclined to deny relative view, here's a method that will help you break out of your narcotic experience. You take a pin and you stick it in your hand. And then you ask yourself if this experience is real. It is real. You cannot deny that it's real. And if it's not real yet, then maybe you don't have much feeling in your hand. Try another tender part. Relative experience is real because you are experiencing it. You cannot deny that you are experiencing it. If you try to gloss over hatred, greed, and ignorance in your mind stream, how will you be equipped at the next time when something happens to you that you feel strongly responsive toward? How will you be prepared? How will you have any real understanding of yourself? How will you know what your desires are so that one by one you can combat them? How do you know what to renounce? How will you know what to do when someone comes up and mistreats you? How will you be prepared to react with kindness? We must accept the condition of samsara. These conditions are necessary to understand. If everything's so glorious here, if you are so free of hatred, greed, and ignorance, if everything is so perfect, then how do you explain all the problems of the world? Just alone the ones you can see and know about. How do you explain war? How do you explain your allowing war to exist in your world? How do you explain the times that you were unkind to others? How will you have the power to change the times in the future when you will again be unkind? How do you explain that you yourself will get old and die? How do you explain cyclic existence? It must be frightening to be trying to convince yourself of something that is obviously a joke. You must feel afraid. You must wonder how you can continue to lie to yourself, how you'll find the strength to do that. And you must suffer from delusion constantly, or disappointment rather, constantly, when you see that everything you've tried comes to nothing. It doesn't work. How difficult. What a sad, lonely incarnation we would have if we had to play this game all the time. I think the most exhausted and fearful people in the world are the ones that are faking it. The Buddha teaches us that we must renounce thoroughly cyclic existence. For some of us that means taking robes. For others of us that means developing to a fine point a deep and abiding and truthful understanding of the faults of cyclic existence. And while engaging in some of the activities of cyclic existence within one's mind, as those children demonstrated, one is certainly a warrior against attachment. One is certainly on guard, realizing the faults of cyclic existence and acting accordingly. One cannot think that one will escape cyclic existence and enter into nirvana. One cannot think that one will be able to achieve realization if one does not truthfully see the faults of cyclic existence and renounce them thoroughly. One cannot think that one will take oneself in hand and really produce the causes of enlightenment if one has not understood the faults of one's own mind. It takes courage to look at oneself squarely in the eye or squarely in the mind and take action based on what one sees. It's a very, very difficult method. Very, very hard. Yet it does not produce the exhaustion that faking it does. It does not produce the sorrow. Ultimately, it produces result. One must have an understanding of relative view. One must also understand the relative objects of refuge. If one has understood the faults of cyclic existence, one then wishes to take refuge in those things which are the antidote to the faults one has seen. And so one takes refuge in the relative objects of refuge. On our path, it's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the Lhama as representative of these three. These are only relative because these are the ones that appear in the world. The Buddha appeared in the world. The Dharma is the method that appears in the world. The Sangha is the community that appears in the world. The Lhama is the doctor and the implementer that appears in the world. And so they are also relative. They are the relative objects of refuge, and through these one can practice the antidote to the relative sorrows that one has seen. One must practice the antidote to the poisons. But then one has to understand as well the ultimate nature, because if one only understands the relative view, one will never get the point. We'll never really understand the point that way. If one tries to understand the point, one must listen to the Buddha's teaching, and the Buddha teaches us that the ultimate object of refuge, the supreme object of refuge, is actually the nature. One's own primordial wisdom nature, the Buddha nature, that is the supreme object of refuge. That nature which is in truth your nature, and my nature certainly, but it is your nature. It is not something that must be built or created. It is your nature, in essence. That is the supreme object of refuge. One must also understand, as one understands the relative condition, one must understand the supreme condition. And the supreme condition is the empty state, is the primordial lucency which is conditionless awareness, which is uncontrived primordial view. That is the true condition, the conditionless condition. That is the true state. The uncontrived primordial view is the true state. There can be no doubt, because if it were not so, then the uncontrived primordial state would not be the goal. If it were not in truth so, it would be unreachable. If the primordial wisdom state were not the true state, the true nature, it could not be, therefore, composed of anything else. It could not be created, it could not be made up. Then there would be no hope to attain that state. So you can say that that state is the fruition, the result, but you must also say that that state is the ground or the potential. And you must also say that that state, that practicing that state is the method as well. However, even so, you cannot, as a practitioner, intelligently think that you can sit down and say, okay, that's the state, let's just do it. Let's just have that. Let's just be like that. Because in order for that to be so, you would have to fake it. You would have to create something. You'd have to make it up. Because you do exist now in the condition of samsara, where all of your view arises from cause and effect habitual tendencies, cause and effect relationships and habitual tendencies, then you must understand that as a practitioner, you must also use a method that arises in samsara, that is based on cause and effect relationships, that uses that method. You must also use a method that helps to purify the habitual tendencies that keep us bound in this relative view. And that method is Dharma. It's like you have many balls in the air, like you're juggling. So difficult to understand. I have seen long-time Dharma practitioners whose practice is so defunct, so weak, so deluded, that they are not in nearly as good a condition as perhaps a much newer, younger Dharma practitioner who is sincerely moving toward annihilating hatred, greed, and ignorance within their mind stream. Because the older practitioner thinks somehow that they have done some work in annihilating hatred, greed, and ignorance, and therefore they are practicing the supreme view. They think that they are Dzogchen practitioners. They think that they have no method to employ, that there is no method. Choji Rinpoche here the other day described a scene that he would see in Nepal on a regular basis, and I saw it too. It was obscene to see Western practitioners walk to and fro amongst these high lamas and wonderful stupas and all these holy things and say, there's nothing to practice, there's no way to go in green view. Yet they had no view. The mind was completely covered up with delusion. They did not courageously root out self-absorption. They did not courageously root out hatred, greed, and ignorance. They did not practice the basic understanding of their condition. How does one practice the basic understanding of their condition? Through taking the time to look, through looking honestly, through having the courage to really see. You do have hatred in your mind stream. You do have ignorance in your mind stream. You do have desire in your mind stream. To the degree that you understand that, that's how deeply empowered you are. To the degree that you have taken up strong weapons against that, that's how strong you are. To the degree that you do not delude yourself about your condition, that's how clear you are. Eventually, through sincerely practicing in that way, the supreme view will naturally be attained. But if you think that the supreme view must be practiced now, that you must be some kind of heavy-duty Dzogchen practitioner now, then you are simply practicing worldly dharma. You are taking thoughts and things in your mind and you are composing a superstructure. You are building a superstructure, and that superstructure is no different than any other ordinary view. It is not the clear and uncontrived view. It is a conditioned state. How does one actually attain that conditionless state? How does one awaken to the supreme nature? Naturally. One will awaken naturally when all hatred, greed, and ignorance are completely pacified. That will be the natural occurrence. There's no need to act like a Dzogchen practitioner. There's no need to walk around looking like one. There's no need to think like one. There's no need to create a practice that seems like one. You can't fake the view. The result is naturally attained when the poisons are diminished. Kind of like clear glass is naturally transparent when it is cleaned off. All you have to do is clean it. That's your job. It's a hard job, real hard job, and it starts by being truthful with yourself. It starts by really understanding the condition of samsara or cyclic existence. No small task. Comes by being sorry that it's like that. Comes by feeling sad. Comes by grieving that there is so much suffering. Comes by working really hard to see yourself truthfully until you are sick to death of what you see. Comes by sometimes losing courage and then having to learn how to have courage. Comes by grieving again and again and again at your shortcomings. Comes by confessing. Comes by practicing really, really hard. By achieving merit, by working really hard to antidote these strong habitual tendencies that we have had since time out of mind, of selfishness, self-absorption, fixation on ego, anger, jealousy, pride, desire. We have them all, every one of us. Sometimes when a new student comes to Dharma and they hear this after hearing so many other wonderful things that they could have done, so many different things that they could have tried, different systems, religious systems where they could have practiced a lot of things that kind of have a feel-good quality to them. They think, gee, this is a tough path. Wow, I'm not sure I want to do this. This doesn't feel particularly wonderful right now. Well, you're right. You're right, but at least there's hope. It doesn't feel particularly wonderful to know that you're stuck in samsara. But knowing that you're stuck in samsara is the first step. It doesn't feel particularly wonderful to see the pain of sentient beings. But recognizing the pain of sentient beings and thinking that it is unbearable is the first step toward a truly compassionate mind. You have to practice like that. It's tough. But it's the only one that produces good result. It's the only kind of method that produces good result. What we have to do, actually, is to cross the ocean of cyclic existence, and it's an ocean without beginning or end, it seems. We've been traveling in it since time out of mind, just tossed about in the waves. Now we have the ship of liberation, the ship of Dharma, and we have to cross that ocean to get to the shore of enlightenment. So my suggestion is not to try crossing it in a boat that's like really flaky, or has lots of holes in it, or not a boat that's like a ghost ship, with too many delusions in it. Not based in truth. You must understand both relative and ultimate truth. Relative truth has to be dealt with. It has to be understood. The condition of cyclic existence must be understood. That it is impermanent. That it arises interdependent from cause and relationships and arises interdependently. That everything that occurs stems from some cause and continues to result in more future cause. It must be understood that cyclic existence is filled with suffering. All of these things must be understood. And one's own personal condition, this must also be understood. And then one must understand the goal. But one can only understand how to arrive at the goal if one understands what the goal is. The goal is one's nature. But the goal is also, and you must understand this, a nature that one has not understood yet, that one has not yet tasted. Because of our strong fixation in cyclic existence, we have never seen that supreme nature. We have never spontaneously and stably awakened to the conditionless luminous state, which is our nature. We have only known what we have known. That state is the only true cessation of suffering. It is the end of suffering, because in that state there is no suffering. You have nothing to make it out of, nothing to compose it out of. It is conditionless. That state is the only true end of suffering, and it can only be arrived at through intelligently and in a well thought out way applying the antidote to the hatred, greed, and ignorance, to the obstacles that keep us from perceiving that nature. Many students in this center are practicing Mundro, or preliminary practice. That practice is geared toward doing that very thing, awakening us to relative view, awakening us to the condition, and giving us the tools of the five senses to begin to pacify as well all of the hatred, greed, ignorance, and the habitual tendency within our mind streams. Mundro is very hard. There are 5 different things that you have to accumulate 100,000 repetitions of. And particularly in the accumulation of Guru Yoga, over 1 million repetitions must be accumulated of a certain mantra and visualization. Why so much? Well, first of all, we have been revolving in this relative view, unawares, since beginningless time. We have had a long time to create habitual tendencies. These are deep habits. There's no end to the self-absorption we have experienced. There's no end to the hatred, greed, and ignorance that we have seen. We have to apply a very strong and heavy antidote, heavy enough to outweigh all of our past experience, heavy enough to be an antidote to such poison as is to our perception. Some people feel that they can achieve realization without applying the method. They can simply sit down and it will naturally appear through some magic, hocus-pocus way. All of the great lamas, all of those who have achieved realization in the Vajrayana path, have done so by beginning with Mundro. All. They have done so by taking out those poisons by the root, and you are no exception. You must also accomplish the method. I must accomplish the method. That is the method. You must face it square on and intelligently root it out. It can't be accomplished. You have it in your hand. It's a jewel sitting right in front of you. The method is here. But please do not fool yourself into thinking that you can go from spiritual experience to spiritual experience, tasting a little here and there, and not apply the method. Please do not delude yourself that you think that you can simply sit down and receive some empowerment and bliss out on the glory of it all and not apply the method. Please do not think that you can walk through life and that naturally it will occur and you won't have to apply the method. These things are not so. That is false. You must apply the method. You must. and with courage. When I look for a student that I will try my best to be of some benefit to, I look for that student having two qualities: courage and the willingness to change. That's it. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be beautiful. You don't have to sing the Dharma song and dance the Dharma dance. Just those things: courage and the willingness to change. And here's the first way you have to change. Learn to have faith not in the things of cyclic existence, those things that will leave you hopeless and without recourse. Learn to change your mind so that you will see the faults of cyclic existence and have faith in the three precious jewels as your supreme objects of refuge, as the Buddha who brings us the path, the Dharma, which is the path, the Sangha, which is the spiritual community that enforces and supports the path, and the Lhama as representative of all three of those, who is the very doctor, the guide, the spiritual friend, who takes the weight of our suffering and transforms it to practice. That's the first change that must be made. And the most difficult, because you'll make it from the first day till the day just before you achieve realization. Learning not to take refuge in samsara, learning to take refuge in the three precious jewels of refuge, is a very, very long and arduous task. The only way to start is to start today. To begin to transform the mind, change the mind in that way. This is the beginning of the method. And so I hope that you will consider these words and consider them carefully enough to where you can actually implement them. Remember, if you just hear them and go home and think, gee, that was nice, then, gee, that's all it was, nice. And nice is not liberation. Do not mistake nice for liberation. Nice is something else entirely. Please practice.
Thank you so much for joining in today and listening to this teaching by Jetsunma along with us. We show these teachings. These teachings are archived. As I said in the beginning, this was taught originally in 1991. And these teachings are archived on YouTube, so you can watch a lot of them, watch them over and over. And we show them on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., Sundays at 11 a.m. This is Eastern time. And that way, you know, it's a time and you can schedule it and do it. And we're so glad to have you with, you know, on the stream with us. We also offer other Dharma for you. Meditation classes led by one of our Anis is on Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. Actually, there are two Anis and they swap out. So you can have that. And that is on YouTube, as well as, oh, by the way, we're now open. And so during 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day. And so you can actually come to these meditations live. And that's this part isn't live at the moment, but other parts are. The Medicine Buddha we do on Facebook, and that's every evening at 7 p.m. It's a very short practice. It's only about 15 minutes, and you can put in your prayers and your wishes for healing for yourself and for others, and partake in this short practice that will really be of benefit to them and to you. So we hope you join us there. We offer a food offering ceremony called a soak every day, and it's on Zoom every day except Sunday. So Monday through Friday, it's on at 5:30 p.m., Saturdays at noon. And then Sundays at 2, we have a longer practice that's also a food offering. It's called the Riggs and Dupa, and we have that across the street at the Guru Rinpoche statue. It is a practice of Guru Rinpoche and the entire assembly of Vidyadharas. So it's, quite crowded in the other dimensional beings there, but, come and join us for that. So let's see. That's where we are now. So today at 2 p.m. at the Guru Rinpoche statue is live. We will try to put it on Facebook. It just it doesn't always come through cleanly. And so just warning you ahead of time. Sorry about that. The internet over there is dicey. So, but it is live, and we really are excited to have you come and come visit. If you're in the neighborhood, please come by, see the temple, see the activities, join in the practices, come meditate in the prayer room. And, we've got some new animals that you might really love. Baby goats that are just beyond cute, much larger pigs that are beyond cute, chickens that are adorable, and geese that are just as charming as they can be. So, and turkeys too. That I keep lumping them in with the chickens, and that's not really fair, is it? But anyway, they are all a lot of fun, and nice to bring your kids to enjoy. So we welcome you here on the property. We welcome you to come and walk the land, the 65 acres, enjoy the stupas, and we just welcome you in general. We'll be so glad to see you. Please come. And otherwise, if you're just doing these, we'll see you on Wednesday. Have a great week.